Thousands of years ago, ancient people around the globe created a number of petroglyphs and cave paintings. Why ancient man depicted strange beings is a mystery no one has been able to answer. However, what is even more fascinating is that even though these petroglyphs are found scattered across the entire planet, the depictions of the mysterious creatures are eerily similar. This has led many to believe that ancient mankind that carved and painted the mystery beings must have seen them at one point in history. Antonio Villas Boas claimed to have been abducted by extraterrestrials in 1957. Though similar stories had circulated for years beforehand, Villas Boas' claims were among the first alien abduction stories to receive wide attention. At the time of his alleged abduction, Antonio Villas Boas was a 23-year-old Brazilian farmer who was working at night to avoid the hot temperatures of the day. On October 16, 1957, he was ploughing fields when he saw what he described as a red star in the night sky. According to his story, this star approached his position, growing in size until it became recognisable as a roughly circular or egg-shaped aerial craft with a red light at its front and rotating on top. The craft began descending to land in the field, extending 3 legs as it did so. At that point, Boas decided to run from the scene. According to Boas, he first attempted to leave the scene on his tractor, but when its lights and engine died after travelling only a short distance, he decided to continue on foot. However, he was seized by a 5-foot-tall humanoid who was wearing grey coveralls and a helmet. Its eyes were small and blue. Once inside the craft, Boas said that he was stripped of his clothes and covered from head to toe with a strange gel. He was then led into a large semicircular room through a doorway that had strange red symbols written over it. In this room, the beings took samples of Boas's blood from his chin. After this, he was taken to a third room and left alone for around half an hour. During this time, some kind of gas was pumped into the room, which made Boas become violently ill. Boas was also subjected to reproductive procedures. Boas said that he was then given back his clothing and taken on a tour of the ship by the humanoids. During this tour, he said that he attempted to take a clock-like device as proof of his encounter, but was caught by the humanoids and prevented from doing so. He was then escorted off the ship and watched as it took off, glowing brightly. When Boas returned home, he discovered that 4 hours had passed. Following this alleged event, Boas claimed to have suffered from nausea and weakness, as well as headaches and lesions on the skin, which appeared without any kind of light bruising. Eventually, he contacted journalist Jose Martins, who had placed an ad in a newspaper looking for people who had experiences with UFOs. Upon hearing Boas's story, Martins contacted Dr. Olavo Fontes of the National School of Medicine of Brazil. Fontes was also in contact with the American UFO research group APRO. Fontes examined the farmer and concluded that he had been exposed to a large dose of radiation from some source and was now suffering from mild radiation sickness. Boas passed away in 1991, but throughout his life always maintained that his story was true. Betty and Barney Hill were an American couple who claimed they were abducted by extraterrestrials in rural New Hampshire in September 1961. It was the first widely publicised report of an alien abduction in the United States. The incident came to be called the Hill abduction and the Zeta Reticuli incident because the star map shown to Betty Hill could possibly be the Zeta Reticuli system, according to some researchers. Their story was adapted into the best-selling 1966 book The Interrupted Journey and the 1975 television movie The UFO Incident. According to reports given by the Hills, the alleged UFO sighting happened on September 19, 1961, around 10:30 p.m. The Hills were driving back to Portsmouth from a vacation in Niagara Falls and Montreal. Just south of Lancaster, New Hampshire, Betty claimed to have observed a bright point of light in the sky that moved from below the moon and the planet Jupiter upward to the west of the moon. While Barney navigated US Route 3, Betty reasoned that she was observing a falling star, only it moved upward. Since it moved erratically and grew bigger and brighter, Betty urged Barney to stop the car for a closer look. They quickly returned to the car and drove toward Franconia Notch, a narrow, mountainous stretch of the road. Betty testified that the craft was at least 40 feet long and that it seemed to be rotating. The couple watched as the silent, illuminated craft moved erratically and bounced back and forth in the night sky. Approximately 1 mile south of Indian Head, they said the object rapidly descended toward their vehicle, causing Barney to stop in the middle of the highway. The huge silent craft hovered approximately 80 to 100 feet above the Hill's car. Using the binoculars, Barney claimed to have seen about 8 to 11 humanoid figures who were peering out of the craft's windows, seeming to look at him. Barney tore the binoculars away from his eyes and ran back to his car. In a near hysterical state, he told Betty, "They're going to capture us." He saw the object again shift its location to directly above the vehicle. He drove away at high speed, telling Betty to look for the object. She rolled down the window and she looked up. Almost immediately, the Hills heard a rhythmic series of beeping or buzzing sounds, which they said seemed to bounce off the trunk of their vehicle. The car vibrated and a tingling sensation passed through the Hills' bodies. The Hills said that they had experienced the onset of an altered state of consciousness that left their minds dulled. A second series of beeping or buzzing sounds returned the couple to full consciousness. They found that they had travelled nearly 35 miles south, but had only vague memories of this section of road. The Hills arrived home about dawn. Their watches would never work again, and Barney said that the leather strap for the binoculars was torn, though he could not recall it tearing, and the toes of his best dressed shoes were scraped. Perplexed, the Hills tried to reconstruct the events as they witnessed the UFO and drove home. But immediately after they heard the buzzing sounds, their memories became incomplete and fragmented. There were shiny, concentric circles on their car's trunk that had not been there the previous day. Betty and Barney experimented with a compass, noting that when they moved it close to the spots, the needle would whirl rapidly, but when they moved it a few inches away from the shiny spots, it would drop down. Within days of the encounter, Betty borrowed a UFO book from a local library. It had been written by retired Marine Corps Major Donald E. Kehoe, who was also the head of NICAP, a civilian UFO research group. On September the 26th, Betty wrote to Kehoe. She related the full story, including the details about the humanoid figures that Barney had observed through his binoculars. Betty wrote that she and Barney were considering hypnosis to help recall what had happened. Her letter was eventually passed on to Walter N. Webb, a Boston astronomer and NICAP member. Webb met with the Hills on October the 21st, 1961. In a 6-hour interview, the Hills related all they could remember of the UFO encounter. Barney asserted that he had developed a sort of mental block and that he suspected there were some portions of the event that he did not wish to remember. He described in detail all that he could remember about the craft and the appearance of the non-human figures aboard the craft. Webb stated that they were telling the truth and the incident probably occurred exactly as reported. After meeting a psychiatrist named Mr. Stevens, they were then referred to Dr. Benjamin Simon of Boston to explore the use of hypnosis. The Hills first met Dr. Simon on December the 14th, 1963. Early in their discussions, Simon determined that the UFO encounter was causing Barney far more worry and anxiety than he was willing to admit. Though Simon dismissed the popular extraterrestrial hypothesis as impossible, it seemed obvious to him that the Hills genuinely thought that they had witnessed a UFO with human-like occupants. Simon hoped to uncover more about the experience through hypnosis. Dr. Simon hypnotized Barney first. Under hypnosis, Barney reported that the binocular strap had broken when he ran from the UFO back to his car. He recalled driving the car away from the UFO, but that afterwards he felt irresistibly compelled to pull off the road and drive into the woods. He eventually sighted 6 men standing in the dirt road. The car stalled and 3 of the men approached the car. They told Barney not to fear them. He was still anxious, however, and he reported that the leader told Barney to close his eyes. Barney described the beings as generally similar to Betty's hypnotic recollection. The beings often stared into his eyes, said Barney, with a terrifying, mesmerising effect. Barney related that he and Betty were taken onto the disc-shaped craft, where they were separated. He was escorted to a room by 3 of the men and told to lie on a small rectangular examination table. Barney continued to keep his eyes closed for most of the examination. Barney thought that a sperm sample had been taken. The men scraped his skin and peered in his ears and mouth. Someone felt his spine and seemed to be counting his vertebrae. The few times the beings communicated with him, Barney said it seemed to be thought transference. At that time, he was unfamiliar with the word telepathy. He recalled being escorted from the ship and taken to his car. In a daze, he watched the ship leave. Betty and Barney's memories under hypnotic regression were consistent with one another, which is significant as they were regressed separate, so there would be no influence on either hypnosis session. Betty exhibited considerable emotional distress when recounting her capture and examination. Dr. Simon gave Betty the post-hypnotic suggestion that she could sketch a copy of a star map that she later described as a 3-dimensional projection, similar to a hologram. When she drew the map, she saw it had many stars. Her map consisted of 12 prominent stars connected by lines and 3 lesser ones that formed a distinctive triangle. She said she was told the stars connected by solid lines formed trade routes, whereas dashed lines were to less travelled stars. The Hills went back to their regular lives. They were willing to discuss the alleged UFO encounter with friends, family, and the occasional UFO researcher, but the Hills apparently made no effort to seek publicity. In 1966, writer John G. Fuller secured the cooperation of the Hills and Simon and wrote the book The Interrupted Journey about the case. The book included a copy of Betty's sketch of the star map. The book was a quick success and went through several printings. Later in life, Betty claimed to have seen UFOs on a number of occasions after the initial abduction, and she became a celebrity in the UFO community. Barney died of a cerebral hemorrhage on the 25th of February 1969 at the age of 46. Betty Hill died of cancer on the 17th of October 2004 at the age of 85. Travis Walton experienced an alleged alien abduction on November 5, 1975, while he was working in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forests near Snowflake, Arizona. Walton was missing for 5 days and 6 hours. After days of searching with scent dogs and helicopters, Walton says he reappeared by the side of a road near Heber, Arizona. The Walton case received mainstream publicity and remains one of the best-known alien abduction stories. Walton wrote a book about his abduction in 1978 called The Walton Experience, which was adapted into the 1993 film Fire in the Sky. According to Walton, on November 5, 1975, he was working with a timber stand improvement crew. While riding in a truck with 6 of his co-workers, they encountered a saucer-shaped object hovering over the ground, approximately 110 feet away, making a high-pitched buzz. Walton claims that after he left the truck and approached the object, a beam of light suddenly appeared from the craft and knocked him unconscious. The other 6 men were frightened and drove away. Walton claimed that he awoke in a hospital-like room, being observed by 3 short-bolted creatures. He claimed that he fought with them until a human wearing a helmet led Walton to another room, where he blacked out. Walton has claimed he remembers nothing else until he found himself walking along a highway 5 days later with the flying saucer departing above him. Suspicion fell on Travis Walton's co-workers, who were suspected of murdering Travis until he turned up. All of the co-workers who were there, who saw the spacecraft, took polygraph tests, and they all passed except for one, which was inconclusive. Travis Walton also undertook numerous polygraph tests, which he passed. Whiteley Strieber claims that he was abducted from his cabin in upstate New York on the evening of December 26, 1985, by non-human beings. He wrote about this experience and related experiences in Communion, published in 1987. In upstate New York, over the 1985 Christmas holidays, Strieber was staying in his isolated cabin with his wife and son. He had become somewhat suspect of potential intruders and had recently installed a high-tech alarm system in the cabin. At approximately 11 p.m. on the 26th of December, he activated the system and the family retired for the night. After a couple of hours, he was awakened by an unusual sound. He felt that the security of his cabin had been breached. He was soon shocked to see a creature in his bedroom. The next thing he knew, he was sitting in the woods which surrounded his cabin. His memories of what had occurred were fragmented. Eventually, to re-establish memories of that night and understand what had really happened, he would undergo regressive hypnosis by Dr. Donald F. Klein. The hypnotic regression would uncover many of the details of his experience. He recalled that he had been floated out of his bedroom and into a waiting UFO. He recalled that the beings he encountered had mesmerizing black eyes that slanted. He was subjected to medical testing by these aliens. One of these was the insertion of a needle into his brain. He was extensively tested for temporal lobe epilepsy and other brain abnormalities at his own request, but his brain was found to be functioning normally. Jesse Long began to experience abductions from the age of 5. Jesse and his brother John were out playing when they came across what they thought was a round house under construction on top of the hill behind their house. He recalls seeing a tall-looking figure with a long rod in his hand with light emitting from it. He recalled feeling paralysed when the light from the rod hit him. From then on, he couldn't recall anything due to the loss of consciousness. The only way that he could remember what happened was when he underwent hypnotic regression in 1991.
What you are seeing is actual footage of Jesse undergoing hypnotic regression.
You will not be
He remembered being taken aboard a craft into a room and separated from his brother. He remembered the cold flat table against his body. The figures poked and prodded his legs. He believed that they had placed a small item into his left shin. He couldn't wear long socks over his shin because it was too painful for him. In 1991, Jesse underwent surgery, which proved that something was in fact in his leg, which he had lived with for 34 years. Unfortunately, the object broke into 2 pieces whilst being analysed at a lab. The mysterious object was revealed to be a remarkable composition with unique surface characteristics that cannot be explained. Jesse Long was convinced that the foreign object was significant with his abductions. Jesse Long's story was far from over. As he got older, the number of abductions grew and became more disturbing. In 1990, Jesse Long was driving through Albuquerque, New Mexico. He described the car being lifted off the interstate into a craft. Whilst on the craft, he claims that he was presented with a baby, also noticing that there were 9 other children standing along a wall. He stated that the moment they looked into his eyes, he knew that they were his children. They walked past him, touching his hand, and he received a message. And that message was, "We're okay. Thank you." Thanks for watching the latest video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like, share, and do leave a comment, and I'll see you soon for some more tales.